Pandora Syndrome. Written by April Walleen. Read by April Walleen. Directed and recorded by Andreas Gallego. Chapter 1. My Human Life. I have to admit, my human life was not so different from my vampire life. I would like to say that I had a fabulous existence before I turned vamp, and that it just got better once I joined the supernatural world. But I can't. Whoever said that all vampires are rich and have hordes of ghoulish servants never met Dora Todd. They were probably thinking of someone else. Someone like my maker. As for me, I wasn't well-to-do and I wasn't influential. I wasn't even an overachiever in high school. The only thing I ever won was a beautiful baby contest, and that was before I could even form memories. Go me. In my human life, I lived in San Diego, which is beautiful to the average tourist, but when you're a local, it's just commonplace. In fact, I hated the musty smell of the ocean, and the way it made my hair and skin feel tacky. Not to mention, I'd nearly drowned in it once, so maybe I was a little biased. The 80s, height of the slacker era, was an easy time. No real wars to protest, no drafts, and there was a rapid surge in fashion and technology. My generation was the last to be raised by our parents instead of colorful cartoon characters. But I digress. I'd barely held down a job as a cashier at an office supply store, which provided me with nothing but an irrational hatred for incentive plans and extended warranties. I was a full-time junior college student with no direction, still living at home with my mother. The only break from the monotony of my stellar life was the occasional keg party or movie night with my oldest friend and coworker, Rosetta. Working at that boring office supply store had been abysmal. But as always in life, the one thing you can count on is that things will change. The day when everything changed began by me organizing my checkout stand when my coworker Jerry slid up beside me. I was deep in thoughts that had nothing to do with customers, printers, or reams of paper. My mind was on slipping grades, my pathetic paycheck, and whether or not I'd have money for the repairs on my beater of a car. Jack had offered for me to move in with him, but what would I even do in LA? So I had neither the time nor patience to deal with Jerry. As usual, I smelled Jerry before I heard him. It was the perpetual cloud of cigarette smoke clinging to his clothes like a second skin that gave him away. Jerry was in his early 30s and already had a pretty good bald spot potbelly combo going on. He also had the confidence of Patrick Swayze without any of the smoothness when it came to trying to pick up girls. I'd made my opinion on his advances known early on and reinforced them with the occasional fuck off or I'd rather eat dirt. Sadly, it never deterred him long. "Hi, Pandora," he wheezed, his acrid breath wafting by my ear. "It's Dora," I muttered, as I focused intently on organizing my checkout stand. I prayed for a sudden rush of customers so I wouldn't have to talk to the man. "A few of us are going out after work," he told me, still standing uncomfortably close. "You need to be there. First round's on me." I rolled my eyes. Despite the fact that I wasn't yet 21, I'd heard this line before. "A few of us" was actually code for just him. Rosetta had treated him to a pity date once. Loquacious Jerry wasn't. "Nope," I told him sharply. "But my shift is over soon, and I'm sure someone gullible will take my place." "You sure?" 1,000%. From the corner of my vision, I saw him roll his eyes. "Have it your way. You don't know what you're missing," he chuckled. I rolled my eyes back at him. I wasn't missing anything. Thankfully, Jerry had decided to move on to easier prey. Unfortunately, I had a feeling it would be Rosetta. She had just stepped up to her own cash register. Her long, thick brown hair was in a particularly attractive braid today. Our horrible work uniform made me look frumpy and pale, but on Rosetta, it somehow managed to emphasize the shapeliness of her legs and complement the rich tone of her Latin features. I was definitely not the only one to notice. Despite the terrible pity date, Jerry still thought he had a chance with Rosetta. I knew she could take care of herself, but I kept a wary eye on the situation. "How about you, girl? Want another shot of the Jerster?" "No," came Rosetta's curt reply. She was never one to mince words. "Aw, come on," Jerry continued. I'll buy you a tequila sunrise. I remember how much you liked those. No, Jerry, she replied more sternly. Jerry shrugged his shoulders. Tough crowd this morning, he said, and then not so subtly pinched Rosetta's ass, making her jump. Fury filled me. Jerry might have said something else then, but it was tuned out as a strange feeling came over me. I swore I could hear whispers, but they were lower than that, almost beyond hearing. I couldn't hear the words or even tell if they were words. They had a scraping, hissing tone to them that seemed to amplify my anger. Before I could even fully register what was happening, a rush of adrenaline ran up my spine and into my hand, which latched on to the nearest object. I swung, striking Jerry in the head. Rosetta shrieked in surprise as blood poured from Jerry's face. He screeched obscenities and pawed at the thick staple now lodged in his forehead. I locked eyes with him then, and his face went white. There was a strange pulsating about him, as though I could see his heart beating. The throbbing around him quickened. My own heart seemed to speed, and I felt as though I could touch the pulsating waves coming from him. "Your eyes!" he muttered in horror, breaking me out of my strange trance. I forced myself to look away, and I stared down at the blood-covered stapler in my hand. Everyone in the store had stopped to look, though I couldn't help notice that no one went to help Jerry. A few people even snickered, but all I could do was stand there in shock. Jerry howled. His words faded into the background as my heart pounded in my ears. My breath seized, and I couldn't make sense of anything. Panic filled me then, and the echoing whispers intensified as I tried to think of what to do. "Run," the whispers seemed to say. I needed to go, so I did. "Dora, wait!" I heard Rosetta call after me, but I was gone, too terrified to turn around. I ran to my car as jumbled thoughts fought for purchase in my mind. I might as well have stapled my resignation letter to the jerk's head because I would never step foot in that store again. I drove home in a daze, mechanically navigating the streets. The world seemed strange around me, almost dull and muted. The colors were less vibrant, and the people, I didn't see many. Occasionally I thought I caught sight of someone, but when I looked, they were gone. Reaching my house, my mind seemed to settle with the comfort of my familiar surroundings. Opening the door, I was immediately greeted by my large, shaggy, blue and white-eyed husky, Sarge. He seemed to bring me back to myself a little, nearly knocking me over with his affection. I groaned into the big smelly dog's fur and guided him onto the couch, where I promptly sat and cuddled with him. I sat there for a long time, attempting to contemplate my situation and what had just happened. Jack roughly dropped onto the couch next to me, jostling me out of my thoughts. My brother was visiting from LA for our grandmother's funeral. A funeral that I had forgotten was today. I groaned inwardly. This had to be the worst day ever. I looked over at him in his black mourning suit. Despite the somber occasion, he sat there like he didn't have a care in the world. It was his default attitude. I wish I'd inherited the same coolness. He made everything look so easy. Jack was the picture of perfection compared to me. He was annoyingly smart and had just graduated from San Diego State University. I'd studied my ass off and barely passed remedial algebra. Whether he was partying and womanizing his way through life or nose-deep in textbooks, he was always at the top of his game. There'd been a time when I'd tried to follow in Jack's footsteps, but the world just seemed to have something else in store for me. Guilty over my faint rush of resentment, I buried my face in Sarge's fur. "So," Jack finally said to me, "I hear you stapled some guy's face at work today." "How did you?" I muttered. Then I realized that Rosetta must have called the house. "Not a smart way of losing your job. Creative, but not smart." "Yeah, well, not everyone can sleep through calculus and pull an A, ass," I hissed back bitterly, and for a second, I thought about telling him about the weird voices I'd heard at work. However, I didn't think it would go over well if I told him that mysterious entities had made me assault a perverted coworker. Though it had been in defense of Rosetta, so I guess there was that. "You could if you tried harder," he replied coolly, not rising to my level. The last thing I wanted to hear was that I needed to apply myself. I just applied a staple to a guy's face. I needed a break from applying myself. He grinned. "Anything else new with you, roomie?" he asked. I smiled. Are you sure you really want your little sister tagging along as you blaze your way through LA? Yeah, well, my roommate moved out and help with rent trumps annoying siblings, he returned. Besides, moping around here isn't doing Mom any favors. She looks like she's dealing with Grandma's death really well. I winced a little at the thinly veiled sarcasm. I'd noticed Mom's sad mood when she thought I wasn't looking. Our grandmother had lived with us all our lives, and it felt like losing a parent. A stern and crotchety one, but still a parent. I looked at Jack then, noticing a slight squint in his eye. How are you doing? What, with losing Grandma? I nodded, and he sighed a little, seeming to consider the question. It's strange, he replied. I know she's gone, and yet, I don't know. It feels like she's still here. Yeah, he smiled. Like we could just walk into her room and catch her sneaking a drink from that gallon of pop-off vodka she always hid in her closet. I laughed at that. I know. I can still smell her cigarettes, too. We sat together reminiscing about our grandmother and how she'd rant about the neighbors or complain about the evil locust in her garden ruining her tomatoes. It was nice to share my angst over losing her. However, despite our little powwow, I still couldn't help feeling that in my moving to LA, I was just running away from my life here, from my unhappiness, and from the loss of Grandma. I also felt like I was abandoning Mom, but something in me was raging to get out of this place. Just up and moving to LA might not have been my most brilliant move, but San Diego was suffocating me. Why, I had no idea. Something in me just knew that this wasn't where I was meant to be. Like my destiny lay elsewhere. As stupid as that sounded. When Jack had pitched the idea to me a few weeks ago, it seemed impossible. Something too grand and sudden to actually do. Now, however, what with my newly unemployed status, I had nothing to hold me back. Though, what would I do to help pay the aforementioned rent? Unfortunately, before I could pack my Star Wars figurines and pose a Jerry Maguire-style I quit scene in front of the whole of San Diego, we had a funeral to attend. Yes, despite smoking a pack a day and demolishing a gallon of vodka every couple of weeks, my grandmother Millie had died of heart failure. After years of smoking and drinking, it was her heart that failed, not the lungs, not the liver. Take that, Surgeon General. I'd loved the fierce old woman, despite the fact that she never liked me. I think it had something to do with my dark eyes and hair, so unlike my Germanic, blue-eyed, blonde-haired family. I don't want to say that my grandmother was prejudiced, but she was unreasonably superstitious. It's like she was mentally stuck in a medieval time where genetic anomalies were akin to witchcraft. So possessing the dusky hues that I did, I might as well have been howling at the moon, wielding a broomstick, and enslaving the minister. Grandma had always called me Devil Girl, though it always sounded less like an indictment and more like a cute pet name. I mean, she'd been calling me that since birth, so I'd been used to it. The way Grandma shouted Devil Girl across the house, she sounded like some Creole lady from the bayou instead of a scrawny white woman from Minnesota. The name never really hurt my feelings, but Grandma's nickname for Jack was Angel Boy, so you could guess her favorite. We held the funeral at the local crematorium. Despite my groaning, it was an open casket. Why go through the trouble of all that makeup and embalming fluid if they were just going to burn her afterwards? It didn't make any sense to me. Guess the old witch just wanted to traumatize us all before going up like a traditional broom rider in a blaze of glory. The air in the parlor reeked of formaldehyde and lilac. It was like trying to aerosol over the smell of burnt food. You could mask it, but you knew there was still something bad around. You okay, sweetie? Mom asked in concern as I stood in the doorway staring at my grandmother's coffin. My mother's long black dress and blazer made the brightness of her blonde hair and blue eyes stand out. She looked pretty despite the circumstances. Then again, she'd always looked like a fairy tale princess to me. Though at the moment her eyes were a little watery and red from crying. Now I, the opposite of my mother, looked like a recovering goth kid in my black mourning dress. You've had a rough day, she continued. I'm sure everyone would understand if you need to go home and rest. I smiled back at her weakly. I'll be all right, I lied. Having gone from a freak out at work, subsequently losing my job, then straight to a funeral was a bit much. But how could I not attend? It's not like there would be another one. Like this was the matinee funeral or something. My grandmother had helped raise me. I owed it to her to be there. As I surveyed the chairs lined up before the casket, a little shiver ran through me. Funeral homes, battlefields, and even cemeteries had always made me uneasy. It was like something was still alive beneath the surface, wanting my attention. Then again, maybe I was just feeling the reverberations from my incident earlier in the day. It was then I suddenly had an impulse to walk towards the open casket. My hatred for the whole display aside, something in me was longing to see my grandmother one last time. Luckily, Jack stopped me, turning my mother and I away from the casket. We sat near the front, waiting for the ceremony to begin. People were gathering around a blown-up picture of my grandmother that looked like it came from the early BCs. She looked a bit like Mom back then, vibrant, pretty, eyes shining with youthful exuberance. I had to tip my hat to her. I wouldn't want the last picture everyone saw of me to be old and wrinkly either. The crowd was small, just my aunts, cousins, and a few family friends. My grandma hadn't had too many buddies near the end, probably because she spent most of her time complaining and watching Wheel of Fortune. As I looked around, I noticed a nervous figure hovering in the doorway of the crematorium. On closer inspection, I realized it was Rosetta. Quickly, I left the sad little cocoon of my family's presence and headed towards her. "Hey," she greeted me unsteadily. I was so happy to see her. Rosetta would be a neutral haven for me, sad and respectful, but not full of tears. Though we hadn't spoken since the stapler incident, so I was worried this might be a little awkward. Rosetta was still in her work uniform. She'd clearly come over on her lunch break. "Hey," I greeted her in return. Joining her in the doorway, we shared a hug. "Thanks for coming." Rosetta kept her eyes on me, clearly avoiding the casket. "I wanted to pay my respects. It's kind of what you do, right?" she muttered, nervously twisting her long brown braid around her finger. I smiled. "Yeah, but you can't even sit through the fog, and that's just movie smoke," I teased. "Being in an actual crematorium with actual dead people must be hell." Rosetta shivered. "Cut it out, Dora," she scolded. "I'm here for you, not the body. Besides, I wanted to talk to you." "For what?" I asked. She raised an eyebrow at me with her patented, "Dora, you're an idiot" look. "Oh, I don't know. How about going all stapler mad on Jerry for pinching my butt?" My face heated a little. It hadn't even occurred to me that that was something she would thank me for. You're welcome." "You gave Jerry quite the scare. He's swearing up and down your eyes went black as the devil when you stapled him." I nearly choked at that, vaguely remember him saying that to me. Maybe my eyes had just dilated during my episode. He'd looked really weird for a minute there. "He's being slightly less of an ass towards the female co-workers," Rosetta continued. "Though it probably helps that we've been threatening to pull a Dora on him all day." She smirked. Jerry was afraid of me. I decided I liked that turn of events. "You know, I talked to the manager, told him what kind of stress you're under, what with the funeral and all. He says he's willing to overlook this." "Rosetta," I sighed, and decided to speak from the heart. "I wouldn't go back to that place if it were the only job left in the world." I looked away then, idly watching as the priest assigned to Grandma's funeral greeted guests. "The manager made Jerry agree not to press charges, as long as I didn't make a sexual harassment claim," Rosetta said then, gaining my attention. "Oh, that's sweet of him," I replied sarcastically. "But I can't go back." I realized then that I hadn't told her about LA yet. Well, I guess now would be as good a time as any. "I've decided to move in with my brother." Rosetta looked up at me in stunned silence. "You're leaving San Diego?" she replied after a moment, looking hurt. I definitely should have told her sooner. "Yeah," I replied dumbly. We stood awkwardly for a few moments. "Well, I guess I should get back to work." "Rose," I called as she began to backpedal. "Good luck in there," she nodded, and then left without another word. I silently cursed myself. Definitely could have handled that better. Sighing, I joined my mother and Jack at the front of the room. There, we muttered meager greetings to relations we hadn't seen since Christmas, accepting their condolences. I couldn't help noticing that no one looked particularly grim. To be honest, they were probably all just surprised she'd stuck around so long, as she'd likely only done so out of spite. When everyone was finally seated, Mom nodded to the preacher. I watched as the priest ascended to the pulpit with that imperious swagger only the clergy could manage. He glanced in our direction with a sad smile I'm sure he'd practiced in the mirror, and then began her eulogy. The priest had a nice generic speech prepared. Grandma had been a private woman, didn't like to talk about her past or family members, and certainly not religion. So with that in mind, he did an excellent job extolling her virtues and painting her as a saint. "We all have our own paths to walk in this life," the priest told our small crowd. "At the end of it, we all go to the same place, to a new life in heaven." I rolled my eyes. I'd like to think Grandma would have done the same. I never really bought into the eternal heaven thing, or hell for that matter. The priest said something about the spark of life fading away, and I sighed audibly, earning a light glare from my mother and a smirk from Jack. To me, when you died, you just went like any other living thing. Your life faded away, dispersing into the ether, and your body became worm food, as nature intended. It was a nice thought, though. I mean, what would you do with eternity in the afterlife anyway? Wouldn't you get bored? Once the speech was over, it was time for the personal accounts. They were nice and rehearsed, nothing about Grandma's vices or temper. I didn't like it. It made me feel like I didn't know her at all. Everyone sat politely listening. You might as well have had an audience full of mannequins. I wish people would be honest and tell stories about her yelling at the mailman for losing her soap opera digest or kicking a pit bull square in the jaw when it tried to bite her. The woman was fearless. By contrast, everybody in the place seemed determined to give accounts that made her sound like an old woman who knitted in a rocking chair and handed out hard candies to children. I never got a single piece of candy from her, not even on Halloween. I was relieved when the eulogy was over, but less so when I realized what was to follow. Everyone was lining up to see the tarted-up corpse of my grandmother. People approached the casket and lay flowers on her hands. No one spent much time on their goodbyes, though. It was like the most boring and morbid amusement park ride in the planet. "Come one, come all, see the scrawny dead Minnesotan woman." When it was my turn to go up, my mother suddenly stopped me. I looked back at her to find worry etched on her face. "You don't have to go up there, sweetie," she told me. It was nice of her to give me an out, given my terrible day, but I felt a pang of granddaughterly duty. Grandma had helped raise me. It had been a long litany of screaming and name-calling, but still, she'd been there. I owed her my respect. "I want to," I told my mother. Mom stared at me, but then reluctantly nodded and let me go. I felt nervous as I approached the coffin. It was then, as if in response to my apprehension, that a familiar, uneasy feeling urged me forward. It was as though something was calling to me, like the wisps I'd heard before the stapler incident. The world around me started to feel dull. There was a jittering in my veins. Yet I didn't fight the pull. I didn't know what to say as I reached the coffin. Other people were saying things. I should say something. It wasn't as though I felt Grandma would hear me, but I still wanted to say something. Something good, true, meaningful. I looked down at the body before me. It was my grandmother, but only by definition. Her pancake makeup and formaldehyde-preserved face formed deep lines at the edges of her mouth, making it seem like she was scowling. I would be upset too if a bunch of people were misrepresenting me on my deathbed. They'd smeared makeup all over her, more than she'd ever worn in her life. The lipstick was too dark, the skin color was off, and the cheeks were too rosy. It looked like someone had fake-baked my grandmother. I felt the injustice of it, and some part of me wished she would wake up and be irate at what they'd done to her. I wanted to see that, and to tell her goodbye. The people before me had touched her crossed hands as they'd said their respects. I figured it was part of the tradition, so I followed suit and placed my hands on hers. It felt vacant and cold, nothing more than a flesh-draped skeleton. I looked back to her pancake makeup face and tried to imagine that she was just taking a nap. It was then that I knew what to say to her. "I am not a devil girl," I whispered to her with a smile. It felt right. It wasn't particularly respectful, but it felt nice to tell her off for once. She might have even approved of my gumption. I started to pull my hand away when Grandma's hand suddenly twitched beneath my own. Slowly, her face turned toward me and I froze. My brain tried to deny what it was seeing. I blinked, wondering if tears had blurred my vision in some way, distorting reality. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes. Perhaps an ebbing panic attack had summoned the hallucination. I looked back down at her, hoping she'd be laying peacefully once more. No such luck. She'd moved, and was now staring up at me, her eyes clear and penetrating. Then, to my horror, Grandma's lips ripped free of the glue that had been keeping them together. "Yes, you are, devil girl," she said. Her voice was hard and low, with barely any breath to it, but I'd heard her, clear as day. My heart pounded in shock. "I love you anyway," she told me. There was no animosity in her eyes, just kindly approval. A look I only ever got on my birthday, or when I brought home the odd A on a test. I swallowed hard, trying to force myself to respond. "I miss you," I finally managed, and was surprised at myself. I felt no impulse to run, no need to scream or even ask if anybody else was seeing what I did. The whole bizarre thing seemed completely normal. Natural, even, to be standing there talking to a corpse. Despite that strange fact, I was just happy to be talking to her, grateful that I could say goodbye properly. "I miss you too," she replied with a smile, which did strange, awful things to the glue left on her lips. "It's all right to let me go." I nodded, feeling terrified and relieved at the same time. "Dora? What have you done?" A deep, tremulous voice called from behind me. I turned to find Jack peering over my shoulder. His eyes were round with horror. I didn't know what to say. I looked back down at my grandmother, who smiled and then closed her eyes, returning to her original position. Suddenly, I couldn't breathe. I heard low, murmuring voices, but there were too many of them at once. The sound was quiet and yet deafening. They were trying to calm me, but it was no use. Grandma's body was spinning away from me. Soon the room, Jack, and the ceiling joined her, like paint swirling together down a drain. I just barely felt my head hit the thin carpeting of the crematorium floor before everything went black. I woke up to discover Jack and Mom staring down at me. "I think she's waking up," Jack said, giving my cheek a sharp little slap for good measure. "Ow!" I screeched, and then retaliated by punching him in the arm. "What the hell, Jack?" "What? You wouldn't wake up," he defended quickly. I rolled my eyes at him. "Drop dead." Mom took my hand then, her face scrunched up with worry. "Honey, are you all right?" Rubbing his shoulder, Jack stared down at me with a slight fear in his eyes. I knew immediately that it wasn't because I'd punched him. He'd seen what I'd seen. "Thank goodness you're okay," my mother sighed. I looked around. I was still on the crematorium floor. I could see that the casket was closed now. "Grandma called me Devil Girl," I muttered to her in a daze. "But she said she loved me anyway." Mom and Jack exchanged worried glances. I noticed a third face staring down at me then, a man with dark eyes, black hair, and a pale complexion. I blinked in confusion before I finally recognized him as my mother's on-again, off-again boyfriend, Rick. I had no clue when he had gotten there. Grandma had hated him. She would only refer to him as that man, so I was surprised he would even show up at her funeral. "Jack," I said, my voice pleading unsteadily. "You saw Grandma, didn't you? I know you did." He hesitated. "You passed out," Jack finally replied unconvincingly. "You were leaning into the coffin and then passed out." I didn't try to argue. Mom and Jack turned to look to one another, and I took my opportunity to escape. I got up, breaking out of their grip, and sprinted for the coffin. I had to see for myself. I wasn't crazy. Not about this, at least. "Pandora, stop!" Mom called as I pulled up the casket lid. I looked down to see my grandmother with her eyes closed and lips shut. She was peaceful once again. My imagination reeled through the possibilities and came up empty. But there was no way I could have created something so real. I shook my head and started to turn away when I noticed the ragged flakes of glue around Grandma's slightly parted lips. Suddenly, Rick was behind me. "Are you all right, Pandora?" It's Dora, I corrected on annoyed reflex. I turned and stared up at him. He looked down at me with concern, his dark eyes like two black pools. I always hated that I looked more like him than my actual blood relatives, so pale and stoic. You would think I'd feel some kinship with him, but he was hardly ever around. When he was, the man never smiled. Now, however, the edges of his mouth were turned up slightly, as though he were trying to be comforting. It didn't work. I just wanted him to go away. I turned and looked back at the room. The only people left were Mom, Jack, Rick, and myself. Mom stood next to Jack, looking worried, and a sudden bout of guilt lit up inside of me. She was sad enough about Grandma. Now I, and whatever the hell had just happened, was making it worse. Jack clutched Mom's shoulders comfortingly, but his expression was strained, and his face was haggard. I felt Rick's hand on my shoulder then, and I jumped. The man was never closer than a couple feet to me, let alone within arm's reach. Yet somehow, despite my own reasoning, I was soothed. I closed my eyes, and the strange sense that had been drawing me towards Grandma seemed to fade. I needed a nap, and bad. I didn't black out again, but reality was a blur for some time after that. Someone must have packed me into the car and gotten me back to Mom's, because I now sat on the couch holding a plate of untouched snacks. Deep in thought, and admittedly terrified that I might have lost my mind, I tried to make sense of the day's events. "Are you all right, honey?" Mom asked me for what must have been the 100th time. Sarge sat at my side, rubbing his massively shaggy head against my leg. His mismatched blue and white eyes shone up at me with concern. I was then treated to a round of slobbery doggy kisses. I'd always felt a kinship with Sarge. It's probably why Grandma had generously given him a nickname too. "Hey, devil dog," I said, mimicking Grandma as best I could, and was rewarded with a confused head tilt. "Okay, Sarge," Mom called, shooing the big husky away with her foot. "Enough love. Pandora needs to lie down." "Mom, I'm fine," I moaned, though I knew she was right. Half-heartedly, I stood and let her guide me down the hallway to my room. Strangely exhausted, I immediately collapsed onto my bed and sank into a deep sleep. I had terrible dreams that night. There was a graveyard, wide and imposing, with no gates or fences to rein it in. I could see no sun or moon, yet I could make out a sea of headstones and gnarled trees as far as the eye could see. Grandma and Grandpa had been there, large as life, along with Sarge and someone else. He was a tall man, cloaked in shadow, more imposing than the limitless graveyard itself, but for some reason, I wasn't afraid of the dark man. He seemed a curiosity, a conundrum, a mystery to be unraveled. He stood with my grandparents, watching me quietly as I approached, walking past crypts and over mounds of grave dirt. I was almost close enough to penetrate the darkness shrouding the man's face when something suddenly grabbed my ankle. I screamed as I fell, but there was no impact. The graveyard was just gone, and I was somewhere else, somewhere alien and completely black. The only definition was created by strange, foggy figures that moved about me like steam on the surface of a black lake. I stood there, disoriented, when a face carved in smoke abruptly appeared before me. "You shouldn't be here," it said in a deep, neutral voice. Before I could respond, it rushed forward, engulfing me in fog. I awoke with a start to find myself safe in the comfort of my own room, clutching tightly to my plush Yoda pillow. Sadly, I didn't get any more sleep that night. I just drifted aimlessly somewhere between fear and excitement, dreams and reality. I spent the next couple of days combing through the logistics of moving to LA with Jack. Now the day had come to finally pull the trigger. It might have been a bit too soon after Grandma's funeral, but I couldn't wait any longer. The crematorium incident might have raised a lot of weird philosophical questions about my own mental state, but the fact remained that I could no longer stay with Mom. For her part, Mom had given up pestering me about what had happened at the funeral, but she had quickly moved on to worrying about my move. "I don't think you're ready for LA right now," she greeted me unceremoniously as I emerged from my room for a cup of coffee. I gave her a strangled sigh. "Good morning to you, too." "I mean it, Pandora. I have a bad feeling about it, and I don't think you should go. Rick agrees with me." First off, I said, turning on her after I'd filled my favorite Doctor Who mug with coffee, creamer, and so much sugar that it was coffee in name only. It's a deal done, and you know it. Second off, I don't care what Rick thinks. He's still right, Pandora. I know running off to L.A. sounds like some romantic new beginning, but it's not going to change anything. Mom, moving into a cramped duplex with my brother is not what I would have in mind for a romantic new start, I said. I'm clearly going crazy and I need to get out of this town. Don't say that. You're not crazy. Oh yeah? How do you explain my stapling coworkers and talking to dead relatives? Mom hesitated a moment before responding. Well, it sounds like that awful man had it coming. As for your grandmother, her death was a shock. It's only natural you would want to talk to her again. While that might be natural, her responding to me was not. I obviously need a change of scenery. Pandora, Mom sighed, grasping for some counter-argument. There isn't anything in L.A. that you can't have here. I shook my head and stirred my coffee, trying to think of a nice way to bash her hopes to pieces. I mean, it was hard to leave. I'd never lived anywhere else, but now that Grandma was gone, the house just seemed foreign. That fact on top of the rest, it was like fate was giving me a big old kick in the ass. Mom was never going to understand that. Mom, I sighed, I love you, but trust me. I smiled. Maybe Rick could move in here, make an honest woman out of you. Mom rolled her eyes at me. You know he's gone in the winter. I rolled my eyes back at her. A summer home, then, I offered. I couldn't entertain the thought of chickening out on L.A. A whole new city was a scary concept, but I felt a pull to go, a pull as strong as the one that brought me to Grandma's coffin. Besides, I couldn't wait to celebrate my 21st birthday there. It was going to be epic. I looked down at Sarge as he eyed me. He looked like he would miss me too, but I knew he was just hoping I had food for him. I bent down and gave him a hug. I'd miss him. I'd miss Mom. I'd miss the house, but my mind was made up. Look, I told Mom, I'll only be a 2-hour drive away. I'll come back and visit, just like Jack. I kissed her on the cheek and then gave her a hug. She embraced me back, and it felt like a proper goodbye. At least I still have Sarge, Mom sighed as the big slobbery husky nuzzled our legs. Just then Jack came in, swinging his travel bag over his shoulder. He stopped when he saw our little emotional huddle. Uh-oh, not wussing out on me, are you? Jack asked. I wish, Mom muttered. Drop dead, Jack, I glared at him. I'm all packed up, just saying goodbye to Mom, I said, giving her a reassuring smile. Bye, Mom, Jack said quickly, hugged her, kissed her on the head, and then pushed me towards my room. Get the rest of your stuff. If we don't leave soon, traffic will be murder.